It is a privilege to have with us Edward Mosberg. He tells from his heart, from his eyes, from his inners. Please rise to welcome and honor survivor Edward Mosberg.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thanks Dr. Rosman for and Professor David Maklis for inviting me here that I could speak to you about the Holocaust. I wish that I would have to stay here and talk to you about the Holocaust and tell you that the Holocaust never happened. But it happened, and I have to tell you about the atrocity and murder that were committed on our family and the 6 million Jews. I have to tell you also about the collaborators that were working together with the Nazis. In 1941, in a small town, the local people gathered several hundred Jews and they pushed them into the barn and they burned them alive. But also we have to talk about somebody else, a family of Joseph and Victoria Ulmov from Markova. In 1942, they took to their house 8 Jews, and they tried to hide them. In 1944, somebody denounced them, and the Germans came in, they murdered the 8 Jews, and they took out Joseph and Victoria Ulmov outside in front of the people, and they shot him. They had 6 children from 1.5 years to 8 years old, and then when the children were crying, they shot them also. We have not to forget this type of a people. We also have to remember Jan Karski, who was the one man who he said he wanted to stop the Holocaust, but he could not succeed. He talked to many politicians and didn't help. There was one here, a family right here in Krakow by the name of Królikowski. In 1942, my wife and her younger brother, 7-year-old, they could not get into the ghetto, so they came down to their house, and the Królikowski family, knowing that they endangering their life, they hid them for several weeks, knowing that in the same building the Gestapo was living. Ten years ago, my wife and I and one of our daughters, her husband, and 2 of our grandchildren participated in the March of Living. On Yom HaShoah, 7,000 children, plus hundreds of adults marched from Auschwitz to Birkenau. My daughter and I have participated in the March of the Living before. For my wife, this was her first March of the Living. In 1944, my wife went on a march of death, but Dr. Mengele selected her to live. I strongly encourage everyone to make that March of the Living. I would like to read you an excerpt from the Holocaust Museum Bulletin. On January 1945, Soviet army units in southern Poland advanced on the little town of Oświęcim. What they have found shocked even the battle-hardened Russian troops. Outside the Polish hamlet was a waste complex of camps covering hundreds of acres surrounded by fences. Pulling up to the open gates in tanks, they found some 6,000 prisoners, many of whom were sick and dying. What is that place? They asked. Auschwitz, they were told. What they had stumbled across was the Nazi largest and most lethal death camp. Only a week before, ahead of the approaching Soviet troops, the Germans began hasty evacuation of Auschwitz, nearly 60,000 prisoners. All deemed well enough to walk had been led on a death march through the snow west into Austria and Germany. Between 9,000 and 15,000 prisoners who were unable to continue were murdered en route, turning the evacuation into the true march of death. The snowy landscape soon turned red with the victims' blood. We ran in the snow like madmen without knowing where we were going. It was a truly death march, hell on earth. My wife went on her second death march at that time. While we were in Poland, we went through the concentration camp, Majdanek, Treblinka, Stutthof, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Plaszow, and Belzec. I have to tell you about Belzec. From March 1942 till December 42, the Nazis brought Jews from Poland and other countries into the camp at Belzec. Arriving prisoners were pushed into the gas chambers, where they were suffocated from the engine motor fumes. The body was burned on the stockpile. The victims of genocide were adults, men, women, children, and infants. Can anyone imagine the horror that a mother experienced while the gas started to consume her baby? While the terror of her choking baby is living, gasping his last few breaths. Can anyone imagine the painful cries and prayers as a survivor? I cannot understand this. No one can understand this. Belzec had become one of the largest cemeteries of the 20th century in Europe. Belzec only had 15 acres of land, unlike of Auschwitz and Birkenau, which had hundreds of acres of land. Belzec was not a concentration camp. Belzec was an extermination camp. It is located in eastern part of Poland, close to the Russian border. Because of this location, it is not visited by any tourists or people from the margin of living. In Belzec in 1942, the Nazi murdered 600,000 Jews, 550,000 from Poland, and the rest from Austria, Belgium, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, Holland, Norway, Romania, Hungary, and Russia. My grandparents, aunt, and cousin were killed. I lost 16 members of my family. When I walked through that now quiet place, I could hear the cries of my family and the rest of the 600,000 Jews. Don't forget us. How can we forget and forgive the barbaric murder of our brothers and sisters in the gas chamber of Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka, or Belzec? To forget or forgive means to kill the victims a second time. We could not prevent the first day that we must not allow to be killed again. We have no rights to forgive. Only the dead can forgive. How can we forget or forgive the burning of synagogue and the holy books and the Torah scrolls? And we should remember that the parchment of the Torah will burn, but the letters are indestructible. They exist forever and ever. I was born in Krakow, Poland. When the war started, I was 13 years old. My family and I were thrown out of our house and put in the Krakow ghetto. During the liquidation of the ghetto on March 13, 1943, I witnessed people being killed for absolutely no reason other than for being Jewish. I saw dead body all around. When the German brought all the sick and infirm people to the gathering square, the crosses and canes and so forth were taken away. The Nazi told them to cross the square, and whoever would make to the other side would be permitted to survive. Those poor people were crawling on their hands and knees. Nonetheless, they were all shot during their feeble attempt to cross over. Also, when a mother was holding a small child in the arm, the Nazi would rip the child out of the mother's arm and smash the child's head against the wall, killing them instantly. Or if a child was hidden in the knapsack, the Nazi would shoot straight into the sack, killing them. Following the Krakow ghetto, I went to Plaszow concentration camp, where I worked in the offices of Commander Amon Gert. I saw with my own eyes how that brutal sadist killed people for no reason other than for pleasure. I saw when he ordered a hanging of a young girl whose name was Weitz. The rope broke twice while they were trying to hang her. By the third time, they succeeded. To my witness, I testified to it. I saw people being shot for no reason. They piled of burning bodies like those that you saw in the movie Schindler's List. Some have alive, never left my mind. The smell never left me. I always smell it. No. I came from intact family, set of parents, 2 sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncle and cousin. I am the only survivor. I'm okay. I lost my whole family. The German deprived me of my youth. My children do not know what is to have an aunt, uncle, cousin, grandmother. For this I will not forgive. I will never forget. My father was killed by the Nazis in the beginning of the war. My mother was taken in transport from Plaszow in 1944. It is 72 years since the SS took her to her death. I can still see my mother waving her hands toward me. It seems like yesterday. If you saw Schindler's List, my mother was in the first selection. My wife and her 9-year-old brother was also taken then. They were both taken to Auschwitz, but they were gassed and they were burned in the oven. And that one day before it, I found someplace a piece of a meat, and I give it to my mother. She was so skinny. She was in her 40s, hungry. I put it in her mouth, and she spit it out, and she said, "This is trefe. I cannot swallow this in memory of her father." My wife's mother was killed with a benzene injection to her heart. And my wife saw when they were dragging her mother's body by the leg and throw into the fire to burn her. In 1944, my 2 sisters and 1 sister from my wife, along with thousands of others, were transported to Auschwitz. And in 1945, they were transported to Stutthof concentration camp. They were led on a death march to the Baltic Sea. An estimated 7,000 prisoners were lined up along the beach and shot. The next morning was liberation. As a young child, my wife was also taken in 7 concentration camps and ghettos. She was in Mielec, Wieliczka, Lublin, Dubienka, Kraków ghetto, then Plaszow, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Bergen-Belsen, plus others between. Her last transport was to Mauthausen, from where she was liberated. In the movie Schindler's List, the people in the selection running naked and circling in front of the SS were actors. When people do not eat for months, they look like skeletons, skin and bones. It is something one cannot imagine. It is beyond belief. And I am a witness to this horror, and I testify to it. When I was transported from Plaszow to Mauthausen, where we were in an enclosed Catholic house without window and facility of hygiene, it was hot. It was August 44. And the people were dying from the heat. If you have seen Schindler's List movie, I was on that train when they were being hosed down with the water. In Mauthausen, where I work in the stone mine, I carry boulders up and down 186 steps. If you stop for a moment, the SS would beat you with their whips, shoot you, or push you right off the mountain to your death. I was there, and I testified to those atrocities. From Mauthausen, I was transported to Linz concentration camp. On May 5th, 1945, the day of liberation, the SS told the remaining prisoners that the Americans were going to bomb this city, and that the SS want to save us. They marched us to the caves that had been set up with the dynamite to blow us up. The dynamite did not go off. They did not succeed. This is why I'm here today. I can attest to those atrocities. In another 10 to 15 years, there will be no more survivors. So you will be able to, your children, grandchildren, of the atrocity that I speak today. Mauthausen was the main concentration camp and had 47 subcamps. One of them was Ebensee. In my opinion, Ebensee is one of the worst camps because where they starving the people to death, and cannibalism became there. You see this whip? I was beaten by 4 men with this kind of a whip. You don't understand what is to be beaten with this kind of a whip. It is 72 years, and I never forgotten this. I wish at that time I would be dead, because once you are killed, you don't feel this pain anymore. But I still today never forgotten this pain. I feel what happened to me at that time. At the end of it, they had a bottle of water, and they want to stick my head to drown me in it. But they did not succeed. This is why I'm here, and I can tell you about this all atrocity. And you don't understand how many times I faced death, but I'm here to talk about it. I believe if State of Israel would exist 75 years ago, they will bomb the crematorium and the gas chambers, and the Holocaust will never happen. So long live State of Israel. The rest of my days are not enough to cry for this tragedy. As long as I live, it is my obligation and duty to tell about the atrocities that were committed on my family and the 6 million Jews. And now I would like you to stand up for a moment in silence for a memory of those that were murdered. Thank you very much. Once more, I want to thank you for inviting me, and Professor, for inviting me that I could talk about this. Thank you. And God bless you all. I'm okay. I'm sorry.
No, stay.
No.
Stay. Edward Mosberg, we honor you.
I'm okay.
We thank you for sharing with us from your heart, from your knowledge. What you said here must ring out. I was a witness to this horror, you said, and I testify to it. We thank you for sharing with us your knowledge, your facts that you witnessed, your truth. We all pay honor to you, to your dear departed, and to your life. And we thank you.
I want to say one more thing. I'm sorry that my wife, whom I met during the concentration camps, that she could not be here because she's sick, she's in a wheelchair. But my wife never spoke. She's afraid to talk. Many times in the night, she wakes up and she's calling her mother, or she's calling me, put me into the water, drown me, the way they would drown her sister. And this is terrible, that the way we live all those years. Okay, thank you.